This special episode of the Amplifying Scientific Innovation video podcast is presented by Big Four Bio and the Sophia consulting firm. Hello and welcome to this special Amplifying Scientific edition and Big Four Bio edition of our very first Know Before You Go conversation ahead of the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. Every January, San Francisco becomes the epicenter of global biopharma deal making and scientific storytelling. Over 1,000 companies and tens of thousands of leaders convene to set the tone for the year ahead in a conference that influences billions in investment and billions of lives. This year's theme, AI in 2026, Signals, Risk, and Real-World Impact, reflects a pivotal moment. We stand at the intersection of discovery and delivery, where human intelligence and artificial intelligence must work in concert to advance health equity, innovation, and trust. I am Dr. Sophia Ononye, founder and CEO of the Sophia consulting firm and creator of the Amplifying Scientific Innovation platform, a 5-year journey that has grown from a podcast into a movement spanning books, toolkits, and apprenticeships. I'm also honored to co-host this session with Big Four Bio, the go-to intelligence source for regional biotech ecosystems. Together, we bring you voices that shape the future of AI across biopharma, health tech, and investment. Let's meet our panelists. Dan Gober is the executive director of Biocom California, representing California's life science heartbeat. Dr. Saudat Fadeyi is the head of business development, Samyang Biopharm USA Inc., a scientist, strategist, and friend that is Region Science and Commerce. Martha Lawrence is the CEO and co-founder of AccendoWave, and an innovator that is turning AI data into empathy and impact. Dr. Amit Ghare is the CEO and co-founder of Fox Health, a new friend and a founder that is building digital infrastructure for future care. Dr. Karen Knudsen, CEO of the Parker Institute for Cancer Immunotherapy and former CEO of the American Cancer Society. She's a visionary leader that is linking science and humanity, and her insights previously reached over 50,000 views right here on the Amplifying Scientific Innovation platform. So are you ready for a show? Let's dive right in. For the very first segment, we're going to talk about AI signals and strategic momentum. The JP Morgan conference has long been where biotech future takes shape. In 2026, just like every other year, but even more so, AI would definitely dominate the conversation, from discovery velocity to deal-making efficiency. I'm going to start with you, Dan Gober, just because, hello, California. What signals from California's ecosystem hint at where AI and biopharma collaboration are headed next year? What have you learned, even from your travels to Europe and everywhere? Tell us a little bit more.
No, first of all, Sophia, thanks for having me join here. Biocom California is the leading advocacy and trade organization for life science companies. We represent over 1,800 different companies, very California focused. And I'm excited. JP Morgan always, as you said, kind of transforms San Francisco and makes California the epicenter. I think it's appropriate, when we look at the economic impact that life science makes in California. We track that every year. And it's about $400 billion in economic impact here. We will also have Bio International in this year in San Diego. So really the focus in California, I think, is going to be appropriate. The number of life science companies that we work with are vast and numerous, from very large to very small startups. When you look at AI, that comes up all the time in discussions. And I think, thinking about this before, we jumped on here, the places I'm hearing a lot from our members, because a lot of them are very early stage, are kind of in that discovery preclinical area, is just the speed at which AI is starting to transform things, from discovery to being able to put legal documents together, programs, different things like that. And I think what people, that coalition of kind of companies that'll be at JP Morgan, they're going to want to know, so how is this impacting now investment? Because investment has lagged a bit over the last couple of years. We've seen a slowdown because of grants and different things going on in the marketplace. And I really believe, this coalition that we represent are going to want to know, hey, how is this going to now impact the investment community? Can decisions be made faster? Is there data that'll be put into this that'll be important in evaluating companies and making decisions on investments? So that's really where I think the discussion is going to be. At J.P. Morgan coming up here, and especially when we think about this group of early stage life science companies that are utilizing AI for discovery, for speeding through evaluation processes and things like that. They're going to want to know, hey, how do we start to implement this so that we can make better, faster decisions around investments?
Yeah, I think practicality is the key here, right? People are not just looking for pie in the sky ideas or
Yeah.
opinions. They want something that works. Another thing that I keep hearing around is like the workforce impact. Are we sort of destroying entry level roles with AI? So there's sort of that concern about that. And before I jump into Dr. Fadeyi, my friend, I'm curious to see if anybody has any thoughts or anything to add to what Mr. Gober had just shared with us. All right, Dr. Fadeyi, it's you. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
One thing I've thought about it, and this comes up also a lot, is people get concerned about jobs being impacted on
Yeah.
this. And if you go back to any big breakthrough in technology, we don't really know what kind of jobs will be created from AI also. I think you look back, one of the examples I heard recently that I thought was kind of maybe it's a little cute, a little trite, but ATM machines. They thought, tellers will never have a job again in banks and so forth. And yet the availability of cash and putting, the product out on the streets. And, I just traveled to Europe, like I said, so
Yeah.
easy just to take
Yeah.
my card into a machine anywhere, and get euros, and so forth. So I don't know if we really know how
Yeah.
this is going to impact. And I think there's always a concern and a worry, but we also don't know how many new opportunities AI is also going to bring forward. So just my own thoughts kind of in that space is we tend to be a little pessimistic, but I would rather lean towards let's be optimistic that this is going to create new opportunities we haven't even thought of at this point in time.
Yeah. I think Karen has something to add.
Yeah, I was just going to say we're already seeing the way that scientific discovery change, is conducted is changing as a result of AI, right? There have already been the landmark papers where agentic AI has been introduced into laboratories to serve vital functions that are sometimes bottlenecks. Things like having a data scientist, right? There's the landmark paper of the group, the virtual laboratory endeavoring to create two new antibodies against COVID-19 in a compressed period of time by developing agentic AI, including a data scientist, including a science critic, into that virtual laboratory setting. And it allowed them to accelerate the science. So as I think about the breakthrough cancer therapeutics that we fund across the country, but also as a major investor, our 17 portfolio companies and the ones that are coming down the pipeline, thinking through how it is that we can accelerate the time at which a scientific discovery actually gets a first in human impact is certainly going to be augmented by AI. And I also think we have an opportunity to do what we've wanted to do in healthcare for quite some time, and that's learn from every patient when it comes to rare disease and others. So I'm with Dan. I'm feeling very bullish about the role of AI. I think it will change jobs, but I think for the concept of getting science to create an impact, it's nothing but an accelerant.
Yeah, I agree with you. I often think about that iron triangle of public health. I mean, how can we balance cost, quality, and access, right? And it's been like this conundrum for ages that we're like, how do we solve that problem? And I think AI is a potential solution, but like any solution, we don't know what we don't know. We have to believe that the system will adjust accordingly to respond to changes, because that's really what, innovation is. How do we respond to changes in our system? All right. Well, thank you both for that very insightful comments that you just provided. Now, Dr. Fadeyi, moving on to you, from your global BD perspective, what trends and partnership structures and stand out to you as you think about how AI becomes more integrated into R&D pipelines?
Oh, thanks for that question, Sophia, and for holding such a great discussion. I think, in thinking through this, Dan and Karen as well, you laid the framework nicely. I think we can safely say, as an industry, we're bullish on AI. I think what we're seeing is an inflection point, right? We've gone from a lot of the early stage sort of discovery platform companies where, again, AI was this essential novelty, and we saw huge trends in terms of, large upfronts and investment. I think, moving forward, we're going to see a change in terms of what folks are looking for in terms of now this AI capability being validated and actually translating into, the clinic is really going to be the essential thing. I think, from a BD perspective, and I will say, at Samyang Biopharm, we are global biopharma advancing non-viral gene therapy into the clinic. We have also been cognizant about how we leverage AI in solving some of the most critical bottleneck in gene therapy, which is delivery, and being able to rationally design options. And you're seeing sort of this push across a number of companies, and that's being evident and demonstrated in a lot of the deals, the partnerships that we're seeing across the landscape. So, in looking at 2025, right, we've crossed over, I think, about 70 billion in total deal value, where a huge chunk of that has been positioned towards, again, investments, deals in AI. We think about the AstraZeneca deal and CSPC Pharma, which not only sets the tone for sort of deal size and deal value. That deal was worth up to 5.3 billion. I think the upfront was around 110, but it's also the way in which these deals are being structured, right? Where a lot of the larger pharma, small to mid cap deals around AI, really the AI-based company serves as that discovery engine. And leads into some of what Dan was saying, which is that, we've long known the issues around drug development, how long it takes to get a drug to market. And I think the conundrum of getting to mid-stage or even late-stage development and having a failure, right, or not being able to progress that candidate further. And so thinking about how AI capabilities can drastically change the way in which we leverage chemical space in identifying, what were once called undruggable targets, or leveraging, I would say, new molecular landscapes. So, for example, I think we've seen a lot of leadway in terms of AI companies really being able to create opportunities for de novo drug development, where you create these new chemical entities. I think, again, from a partnering perspective, what you're seeing is that a lot of the appetite around AI, it's not just the technology, it's not just the ability to ID new targets or measure, proximity or things within the environment of the target that you're trying to go after, but it's also around being able to tie this to a specific modality. So, for example, molecular degraders and molecular glues, ADCs, these are all areas where we're seeing a lot of these partnerships being forged. I think another interesting aspect in terms of, global deal perspective is how the larger pharma companies are shaping the landscape and bringing a lot of the development in-house. We talk about federated AI, machine learning and generative models. Good example of this is what Lilly is doing, right? In terms of Tune Labs and kind of opening up this federated landscape where you can have protected data, of course, but utilize a lot of these tools in a very unique way. And lastly, one of the things that I'll say is that, early on, again, AI was sort of the novelty and the exception. I think in a lot of the partnerships and moving forward, one of the things we can expect is that AI is really the expectation. It's going to be the background technology driving a lot of the development that we do, not only across therapeutics, but we open up, opportunities in terms of diagnostics, There's a lot happening there in terms of, companies identifying new biomarkers, being able to identify new hallmarks of disease in a way that we haven't previously been able to do, really moving us towards this era of personalized medicine. But also seeing this across, longitudinal data, disease monitoring. These are all aspects that I think are going to drive a lot of the partnerships and deal opportunities across the industry.
Yeah, extremely well said. So that as you were speaking, I was thinking about the WHO's definition of health, which is about physical, mental, and social well-being. And I feel like in terms of actual innovation and that ability to be pervasive across all sectors, AI has that potential. Mental health in particular is something that I am interested in because we don't often speak about it, right? It's something that it still has that stigma on it. And then you made a point around rational drug design. It's been around for decades, but to your point, when does that become the standard? When we start to like, hey, this is no surprise here. Let's take this to the next level. And that's really what I hope will be the next frontier in terms of innovation. Let's stop making it seem like it's brand new. AI has been around for decades. It's not really new per se. It's about changing our mindset. And the best way to change a mindset is with a very good story. So speaking of stories, let's move on to segment number 2. And we're going to talk about AI and storytelling, not just any type of storytelling, but storytelling with integrity. So at JP Morgan, one of the things I appreciate is how we communicate science. And that often shapes perceptions as much as the data itself, right? So AI has redefined storytelling, amplifying reach, yet testing our responsibility as humans and as global citizens. So before I dive in, I want to pause on something that is deeply relevant to both innovation and communication, and that is trust. I had hosted the LA Tech Week last month, and actually back in October. And one of the things I remember about those conversations, it came with Dr. Fadeyi afterwards. We talked about, are we trusting AI too much? I mean, how much are we sharing with ChatGPT? So AI has become woven into our daily workflow, but we're still navigating its boundaries. And ChatGPT, for example, can feel like that brand new friend. They are just still vetting, powerful and insightful, but very, very deserving of caution. So as we grow more comfortable, we may disclose more personal or strategic information, but how much is too much? And could today's convenience become tomorrow's vulnerability? So as AI becomes second nature, these questions about disclosure, privacy, and long-term risk are critical, especially here at JP Morgan, where trust underpins every partnership that we talk about. So moving now to Martha, I've been waiting to hear your voice. How is AccendoWave using AI to turn data into empathy in patient engagement?
Well, thank you, Sophia. And it's wonderful to be here with all of you as well. So AccendoWave is a pain data company. We've got 9 objective databases on pain. Our 2 most important are a database on women in pain and maternal health and pain. And that's important because 80% of pain research, human men and male mice are barely in the data. So we are focused on really validating your pain. We use machine learning technology. We correlate your brain waves with your perception of pain. We quantify the data, and then we benchmark it. So validating your pain and also providing objective pain data and pain databases. So validation of pain is important because it turns out pain has a bias problem. Bias against women, bias against ethnicity, biased against seniors. Really, and I mean no disrespect here, but it's really only white men under 65 that are not seeing this issue. Many of those other groups are on the receiving end of medical gaslighting. And why that's important is because when pain isn't believed, you lose trust. Trust your doctor. You don't trust your healthcare system. It's a root cause health equity issue. And then secondly, in terms of pain data, so pain is actually the number 1 reason that patients access healthcare. So it's a primary driver of cost. Pain data shows up nowhere. It's not in claims data. You can't actually get it out of your electronic health record, even if you could. It's very low quality data. So market stakeholders have no insight into or data on a primary driver of cost.
Hmm.
And it's actually kind of shocking when you think of it. Like, what other industry doesn't have data on a primary driver of cost? Would that be healthcare? So that's really our focus in terms of making this a data-driven conversation. The research and the real-world data shows that pain is riddled with bias, and we're really trying to bring objectivity to one of our most subjective measures in all of medicine.
Yeah, I mean, extremely well said. I obviously couldn't agree with you more. One of the data that I like to cite, being an African woman, is that roughly 250,000 African women die in childbirth every year. We don't talk about it, but we're not supposed to talk about our pain. We're supposed to mask it and say, that baby, I just had a baby 1 hour ago. I'm going back to work in 5 minutes, right? And I think it's like removing the stigma around pain and allowing people to sort of acknowledge how they feel without somebody else directing how you should feel. And I think AI can help us with that, being sort of that neutral infrastructure that helps people to feel like their voice is heard and it's further amplified. So thank you for sharing that insight. Now, before I move on to Amit, just wanted to check in if any of our other panelists have anything to add. Great.
I'll just make a quick
Yes.
point, Sophia, just to add to that, because I think it's such a critical area, and advising a lot of early stage development and companies in the space. I think, AI really has the ability we see to sort of this trajectory of innovation and development, but as the point has been made, also exacerbate that chasm in terms of disparities. One of the companies that I know is doing a lot in this area, Fox Health, developing symptomology tracker for women in pain that I think will see a huge trend of companies following suit. So it's an important point.
Well, Amit, I think it's a good time to talk about Fox Health and just to also share your insights about the biggest storytelling challenges when translating AI-driven infrastructure into clinical or investor value. I'll be curious to hear your insights on this, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thank you, Sophia, for the opportunity. So yeah, as an internal medicine physician first, I was with Kaiser Permanente down here in Southern California for nearly a decade. Made partnership and everything and walked away from that to start a tech-enabled delivery company to help patients, no matter where they live, access their care by virtue of a better logistics service and technology to power that. And today, Kaiser is one of our clients around the country. So, part of the narrative of storytelling, it's important as we rush towards this era of more AI, more software. We can't forget the humanity of it. Before AI, there should be HI, or human intelligence, right? Because once the work is done by AI, there's still humans that have to talk to each other and make a decision about the value of a product, service, and hitting that holy trinity of being truly better, faster, or hopefully cheaper. And you see companies out here trying to add the narrative of AI or make it their primary narrative, but I kind of always look to the past as where we should learn. And in the .com era, when companies would add the word .com to their company, and suddenly they were of value, and they're the next greatest thing. And one example, when Amazon first came out, Jeff Bezos made a point to say his company was called Amazon.com. And the reason he did that because we had to usher into this era that the internet was something real, something viable. His stat that he said that the internet was growing, several thousand% a day of usage. He wanted to make sure his company was part of that wave. And then, as everyone knows, as the .com bubble burst, the companies that survived through the ashes of that are the ones that actually had viable business models that could exist. And we fear that AI is going to replace everything. And it's through those ashes of like the .com era, where Pets.com had to exist for one day Chewy.com to exist. Webvan, which was the service that was delivering groceries in a tech-enabled way, had to fail and exist through the .com era. So one day Instacart could exist. So these technologies can happen. It can be a matter of timing. But I love technology. I left my career as a physician because of technology. But I personally have to be cautiously optimistic because, like I said, I'm not denying AI has its benefits. My litmus test for AI is to actually add 2 letters around the word AI. One is the E and one is the L, and it spells email. And if email can do what you're describing that AI can do, is this a truly viable solution? And as we see companies adding the word AI to their company names today, will that usher in what they truly are offering value-wise? Or is AI just a tool that we all have access to? And as you've probably seen in the world, it's slowly becoming potentially a commodity as we all tab between different language models to solve a problem, whether it be ChatGPT, there's many others out there. So part of that storytelling, though, is to get back is not being so focused on the tool, but being focused on the outline of that. So in the storytelling world, yes, there's act one, two, and three, but what's the punchline? What's the theme of that story that you're trying to tell to solve that problem? So in my world, we don't present the word AI whatsoever. It's not because we don't use it, but we don't make that the defining value of our story. Our story is how do we get patients access to their medications in a tech-enabled way? We use AI. We use email. I'm not on the hill, announcing from the hilltops that we have email at Fox Health. Everyone has email. So like I said, I want to still say I'm not denying the power of AI. We need to be careful about the story we tell around it and not make it a defining feature of a company. It is an aspect, it's a tool we all have access to, and it can help us tell a story better, but it is not the only story. We are the characters of that story.
Yeah, I think sometimes becomes almost like a marketing gimmick. Everybody's AI enabled and AI propelled, AI powered. And I think we are looking for real impact, which is really a great segue to our next segment. But before I go there, I also want to share what you had mentioned about storytelling. I remember this HBR article back in 2003, Harvard Business Review, and it was talking about the impact of a good story. So information that is presented via storytelling is 20 times more likely to be retained than just facts alone. So I think instead of just going the easy gimmicky route of putting .ai or whatever to sort of showcase your company's AI impact, it's really thinking about what is the story and what impact does it have on humanity. And I feel like we're going to spend the last section of our discussion on what might be the most important, which is AI for human impact, because the true measure of innovation lies in human impact, and AI must serve humanity, not the other way around. And Karen, the last time I spoke with you, this was in 2002. Sorry, 2022. Geez, what is wrong with me? 2002. I just came to the US in 2002. I don't think I was talking to anybody quite yet. But in 2022, we had this great conversation. And I remember what you said. You said, we will cure cancer through research and advocacy. That was essentially what you said. And I feel like that is such a bold statement. And it's the kind of statement that really doesn't change over time. But instead, we probably need to place guardrails around that sort of thinking, right? So what guardrails must we build to ensure that AI advances healthcare without widening inequities? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually think that's a perfectly reasonable expectation, and done right that AI can help us do that. So just to add some context, I was a longtime healthcare executive running one of the NCI designated cancer centers and the oncology service line for a 16 hospital system across 2 states, one of the largest health systems in the US. So I think I've seen every challenge humanly possible that exists in the US when it comes to everything from cancer prevention to the challenges to diagnosis and detection, to completing a management plan to survivorship. There are pain points all across the way where I see technology as a way to help solve for those. And that's happening actually in real time. So take the case, the plight of a cancer patient. So the average cancer patient sees 32 different providers during their cancer journey. Just imagine making a reservation or an appointment with the same dentist 32 times. And you can imagine just the pain of the logistics of what it is that we ask a cancer patient and their caregiver to navigate. So we're already seeing a number of different solutions in the cancer space help patients understand and navigate their journey. We know that that's critical because there's a human workforce bottleneck in patient navigation. I'm very proud of the fact that when I was the CEO of the American Cancer Society, one of our major advocacy plays was to get federal legislation for patient navigators to be a reimbursable component of care. And we achieved that. We were the lead in that. And so I think it was one of my personal goals. And we got there. But that's not enough. There has to be a technology enablement to help. And there are a lot of people who are in that space at the moment. But we've poured resources into scientific research in the US, as we should, and we've made good on it. 34% decline in cancer mortality since 1991. That was the high watermark for cancer mortality in the US. And understanding that cancer is 200 different diseases, we still have a lot to solve. There are some where we're doing really well and others that are going sideways. So lots to do. Science is out there. It's happening. It's happening at this increased rate, as we talked about. But it's sitting there on the laboratory floor. So how do you get it off and into people? That's the role of clinical trial and also capitalizing early stage companies. It's why so many of us are on this call. We believe in that model. But we all know, as much as we've been talking about clinical trials in the United States, that the beating the bully pulpit to get more people on a clinical study, which is the most advanced form of cancer care, has largely not worked. Now I think we're in a different era. So we're seeing companies like Paradigm Health, amongst others, that I think is really fantastic, coming through and using AI and the LLMs to determine, and I say this as a former healthcare person, very helpful, solve the bottleneck of, should you open this trial? Do you have the right patient population? Do you have the right person at the head of that study? Do you have the right infrastructure to get it done? If not, what would need to be true? Or secondly, let's just take all the manual work of matching patients to clinical study and put that in a scenario where there's a human in the loop, but we can actually go through the very challenging inclusion-exclusion criteria and match patients to study. Great. And then after that, let's get rid of the bottleneck of not having enough people to pull down and do the data management and serve in some of those research coordinator roles. So I think that there are ways that we're already using AI to democratize more access to clinical trials. And the use case for companies like, at least for Paradigm, I know, caveat, I am on their board, so I'm very familiar with the model, is rural health. It's a place where there's just talk about deserts, a serious desert in clinical trial activity. So no surprise that cancer outcomes are not the same. So I think that's a massive area where AI is already doing its job. It's AI for good that's not theoretic. It's actually AI for good that's happening right now. And then the other company I would point to that I think is really, obviously first mover game changer is in the early detection space. So early detection is obviously there's a lot that's happening in the MSED space. But then let's say that someone actually has a cancer diagnosis. How can we take technology and match that patient to the right study the first time? There was a landmark in the cancer space, the company called Artera AI, that is the first predictive and prognostic test for prostate cancer, which happens to be the cancer that has the widest cancer disparities in all of the US. So Black men, for example, are 2 to 4 times more likely to die of prostate cancer than their white counterparts, and 70% more likely to get prostate cancer. It's the second leading cause of cancer death for men in this country. So how are you going to start to get to people on the right therapeutic the first time? So Artera took decades of clinical data, diagnostic specimens with nothing but the H&E, nothing but the initial one slide, that's the diagnostic, and trained to say, could we predict and also develop a prognostic test of the natural course of this person's disease and what therapy they should be on. They're in NCCN guidelines. They have FDA approval. They're the first, to my knowledge, AI strategy to actually move into that space. There will be others. But again, that's AI for good. It's not theoretic. It's happening now. And I think in both of those cases, democratizing access to clinical trial, democratizing access to getting the right therapeutic decision the first time, no matter where you are, at a very cost-effective way. We're starting to see this unfold and more will come. So I'm feeling really bullish about it. How do we make sure we put guardrails around it? I think we have to make sure that we are evidence-based. And that the data very strongly support that this is assisting someone getting to a standard of care or potential curative therapy when it comes to cancer, or putting those decision makings out into an area where people have a lack of access. So I feel really excited about what's happening now and what's coming.
No, I mean, it's not an easy problem. So the solution is not going to be one. It has to be streamlined and it has to be intertwined. One of the things I'm hearing from you is we need to change our expectations about AI. It needs to be sort of less differential and more proactive, right? If we're so smart and this is 2025, what are we doing to make sure that our sick patients are getting access to care sooner rather than later, right? Because prevention is also better than cure. I mean, we always talk about tertiary care, but I think there's a lot more that we can do even from a preventative medicine standpoint. So I'm going to do a quick open reflection on this very important topic to see if any of our other panelists have a few thoughts to share before we be wrapped today. So my question for you is a simple question. How can AI become a tool for inclusion, not just efficiency, as we enter 2026 and beyond? And Martha, just because you were looking at me, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I think there's tremendous opportunity to use this technology in a very meaningful way to enhance, health equity and to listen to our patients to improve care. And when we talk about AI, one of the things that I would just add here, I think we sometimes have to get a little bit more real. As a former hospital executive for HCA for 18 years, we have to compare AI to actually what we're doing in our healthcare facilities today, not where we wish we were, but where we are today. So in pain, when you're in my hospital and you can't communicate with me, I just stare at you and I guess. I mean, that's my toolbox. I try to make educated guesses, but that's what I'm doing. And so I think we have to be very real about what we're comparing and do that in a way that really enhances health equity and inclusion and really listening to our patients and identifying this technology and where it's the most impactful for them. But I also think that we have to, as we look at that comparative, I think we have to be very honest about what exists in our marketplace today and how we're using AI as a comparison.
Yeah, very well said. And Dan, curious to see if you have any additional thoughts on that as AI as a tool for inclusion.
Yeah, and I think I mean everyone's touched on a number of things, but reflecting a little bit on what Karen was just talking about and the story she was telling about diagnostic and I think that's a place where AI can really start to break through is in the diagnostic area because we know, especially in cancer, the earlier you detect it, the better your outcome, regardless of the cancer, across the board. So the diagnostic space is exploding, and I think AI is starting to get in there. Our challenge is going to be the delivery of that. And to rural areas, as she pointed out, but to some of the urban neighborhoods as well. It's a challenge sometimes to get that information out, to get people tested, to get people to know that maybe you're a little bit more prone or a little higher at risk, and and then the delivery of that care, that diagnostic process. So there's a number of challenges that come with it, and I think this is where AI is going to be interesting. It's going to push us to where we're going to have information, we're going to have ability, but now how do we deliver it in an effective manner? And I think that that's probably the next place where we got to start thinking about, how do we enhance some of that? How do we deliver that in a very effective manner?
Yeah, extremely well said. I think about the AI and health market. I think the estimate is by 2030, it's supposed to grow to $210 billion. And I think the estimate is maybe 5 to 10% of that is just in the diagnostic space alone. In my opinion, it should probably be more because to your point, if we're able to diagnose better and be more precise about that, then we're getting solutions to patients faster. And speed is often the difference between life and death in a lot of these terminal conditions. So something for us to keep at the back of our minds. So we've done it. We've come to the end. And this is the part where you get to say whatever you want for about a minute or two. And in 60 seconds or less, maybe more. I don't want you to feel so rushed. So we could make it 90 seconds. We could even make it 120 seconds. So in your own voice, at your own pace, tell me, what actionable insight would you offer leaders as we prepare for JPM 2026? And so that I'm going to start with you.
Well, a lot to think about, a lot to be said. I think, in a nutshell, in terms of JPM, and a lot of times it's the launch point, if you will, for the year, and so trying to weed through the sentiments, pick up sort of the signals in the tea leaves. I would say that we need to approach AI from an ecosystem perspective. And a lot of times, I think when we're looking in terms of value creation and sort of launching the bell in terms of innovation, it's around being able to leverage those synergies, being able to move faster, cheaper cost in a much more saturated landscape. And so I think a lot of people are focused on how to stay competitive, how to stay ahead of that curve, and I think we need to be thinking about how you do that from a partnership perspective. But in the same token, I think in the essence of this discussion and a lot of what we've mentioned, it's important that we understand AI is shifting the dynamic. As we think across drug development, as we've mentioned, diagnostics, and where technology is leading us to, it's really about the outcomes and the impact. And so I think access, the inclusion, which I'm really passionate about, needs to be a huge part of that conversation and psyche. And by virtue of its nature, I think, AI, as positive as it is, can be exclusionary in terms of access and exposure. And so how we leverage, I think, all the points from this conversation, including the storytelling piece, being able to communicate and have empowerment over healthcare in using AI as a tool, is something that we all have to kind of focus on and crack.
Yeah, well said. Access without the opportunity is really a wasted barrier, right? If we're not going to be able to access these opportunities, then what's the point? So thank you for sharing that. And Martha, we're going to move on to you.
Sure. So I think one of the themes that I hope to see more of at JPM is really the focus on pulling massive cost out of our healthcare ecosystem. I think that's really necessary. I do a lot of work with the Milken Institute. I sit on a lot of employer calls, and they are very cranky about what's happening in healthcare. And so I think there has to be a significant focus on how we pull cost out of the system and how we validate outcomes. I'm actually an advisor to the Trump administration's AI regulatory sandbox initiative. So I think the focus around real world data, validating that, as well as credentialing and certifying these innovations, are going to be incredibly important and wonderful opportunities for the companies that are going to be coming to JPM and to validate what they're currently doing in the marketplace. So I think both the cost piece paired with validating outcomes will be incredibly important.
Yeah, very well said. Outcomes-based research is really the wave of the future, and our cell phones are going to play a very important role in how we share this real-world data. Can't wait to talk about that in a future episode. Now, I'm going to move on to Amit. Do you have any final thoughts to share?
Yes, it was a great movie about a real doctor named Patch Adams that came out in the early 2000s. And there was a great quote for that movie that I always live by is, you treat a disease, you win or lose. You treat a person, you'll always win. And that lens is, no matter what the technology is, should always be the perspective. Are you actually treating a person in the output of what these technologies can do? Because the true definition of technology is anything that turns two steps into one. And the best technology is anything that turns one step into none. And technology should exist, but it should be invisible, should not get in the way of the care that we need to provide, at the bedside. No patient of mine ever said, thank you for using this brand of EKG monitor, or your EMR is so great. It's all about a human conversation and making them feel less scared and less vulnerable about what they're going through in their disease state. So I would caution the litmus test that I kind of harped on before is always look to see what this product can do to make something better, faster, or cheaper for healthcare. Better has a pretty broad definition. Faster is pretty easy, but cheaper, I would caution, is that true to the case? Is this technology actually going to be truly cheaper? Or is it something that could be almost like an Uber model, just being subsidized and giving away $8 rides to the airport, and then, by the time it actually comes out and we actually need to fund this thing, suddenly it's a $38 ride to the airport. So we have to be careful and just use business 101. What's that test of is it truly better, faster, cheaper? keeping that humanity and that story to take care of patients better.
Great. I mean, I think in this value-based era, I think centering patients in our conversations around health is even more important than ever. We joke around Dr. ChatGPT, but that's not the only physician we need to worry about. We have surgeons now that are robots, and there's a lot that is going to be happening in the future, and the future is going to be quite interesting. Now, Karen, I'm going to move on to you for a second to last insight for today. Could you please share?
Yeah, so I agree with everything that was said. So let me take a slightly different tactic, which is kind of maybe more specific to JPM, which is I'm really looking forward to this meeting because it feels like deal flow is opening up, right? We've got several of our companies and raises at critical moments moving from that preclinical to the clinical stage, excited by what that means, but also really enthusiastic about the fact that we're all now taking a very different global view, right? We're seeing very different movement in the US about where it is that some of those great partnerships or assets or technologies are going to come from. They're not all coming from US laboratories anymore. So that global view will be important, I think, for viability, for us to move products and assets forward, but also to make sure that we're giving patients across the world, but here in the US, every opportunity to leverage the best technology. It might not come from here. And clinical trials are happening in an interconnected way, outside the United States as well. So really looking forward to probably more than ever taking a wider global view at JPM to accelerate our goal of advancing breakthrough cancer therapies.
Yeah, very well said. There's a reason why we go to JPM every year, as crowded as it might be, because we're hoping to hear really impactful insights that will shape how we look at the year. And I can't think of a better person to wrap up our insights for the day. So, Dan, could you share some insights?
I'll tell you what, I'm going to leave us with one very practical insight. We talked about, the data that'll be shared at next week at JPM and different things that are going on and our expectations, but you're also take advantage of the networking. You're going to meet a lot of people. I think, we've talked about AI and all those things, but that human touch, that networking, going to those events, meeting people, and then make sure you do some follow up afterwards because I think having everybody in one place and being able to meet and touch and shake hands is hugely valuable in our society, especially when we sit at these Zoom meetings and behind computer screens and stuff for so long. Next week's a great opportunity to really dig in and just get to know some people.
Yeah, when I first started the podcast, I missed the JP Morgan conference, and I was like, "What way could we come together and still talk about it without physically being there?" But what I like about 2026 is we get an opportunity to chat a little bit on Zoom and then get off Zoom, go outside, and like you say, hold and touch and people, and go to as many cocktail parties as possible, of course. So, in wrapping up today, I'd like to thank our panelists and Big Four Bio for collaborating on this conversation that bridges insight and action. The JP Morgan Healthcare Conference is more than a week of meetings. It's a moment that shaped the trajectory of science and society. As we've heard today, AI isn't a replacement for human integrity. It's a reflection of it. I'm Dr. Sophia Ononye. Thank you for joining us, and let's continue amplifying scientific innovation with clarity, collaboration, and courage. Thank you again. This special episode of the Amplifying Scientific Innovation video podcast is presented by Big Four Bio and the Sophia Consulting Firm.